The evening sky painted streaks of orange and purple as Special Agent Desiree Williams drove down the empty highway. After 16 hours undercover, all she wanted was a hot shower and her bed. The case had gone well, a drug trafficking ring dismantled after months of careful work. 12 years with the FBI had taught her to savor these small victories. She adjusted the radio, humming along to an old soul tune. Her dark curls were pulled back in a neat bun, her blazer hanging in the back seat. The road stretched ahead, quiet and peaceful. Just 30 more minutes and she'd be home. The flash of blue and red lights in her rearview mirror broke her moment of peace. Desiree checked her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. She signaled and pulled over to the shoulder, her mind automatically running through standard procedure. She'd been stopped before, usually nothing serious. She lowered her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. The police cruiser door opened and a white officer stepped out. Something about his walk, stiff, hand hovering near his weapon, made the tiny hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "License and registration," the officer demanded without greeting. His nameplate read, Officer Benton, tall and broad-shouldered with close-cropped hair. He looked down at her with hard eyes. "Good evening, officer," Desiree said, keeping her voice friendly but professional. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Officer Benton's face tightened. "You were driving suspiciously," Desiree blinked. "Suspiciously? In what way?" "I ask the questions here," he snapped. "License and registration now," she nodded slowly. "I'm going to reach for my credentials in my jacket pocket. I'm an FBI agent." She moved deliberately, telegraphing each motion. "My badge and ID are right here." She held out her FBI credentials, the gold shield catching the last light of day, her photo ID clearly visible beside it. Officer Benton barely glanced at it. "FBI, huh?" His tone made it clear he didn't believe her. "You expect me to think you're with the FBI?" Desiree kept her expression neutral, despite the knot forming in her stomach. "Yes, sir. I'm Special Agent Desiree Williams with the Bureau's Organized Crime Division. You can call my supervisor to confirm if you'd like." The officer snorted. "Yeah, I bet. Anyone can buy a fake badge these days." He handed back her credentials like they were something dirty. Real ID now. Desiree took a slow breath. This wasn't her first experience with prejudice wearing a badge. "Officer Benton, I understand you're doing your job, but those are authentic FBI credentials. If you have concerns, protocol is to call the local field office to verify. My supervisor's contact information is right there. Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand now resting on his holstered weapon. The situation was escalating, and Desiree knew it. As a black woman in law enforcement, she'd learned to navigate these waters carefully. She thought about the recent news stories. Traffic stops gone wrong, officers claiming they felt threatened, lives ended in seconds. "Officer, with respect, I haven't been told why I was pulled over. I've identified myself as a federal agent. Is there a specific reason you need me to exit my vehicle?" Her voice remained steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Out. Now." Officer Benton stepped back and partially unsnapped his holster. Desiree made her decision. Fighting this now on a dark stretch of highway with an officer whose intentions were unclear wasn't worth the risk. She would comply, document everything, and address it through proper channels later. "I'm opening my door and stepping out slowly," she narrated her movements, a habit from years of high-risk situations. The evening air felt cool as she stepped onto the asphalt. Standing at her full height, she was still shorter than Officer Benton, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from her training and experience. "Hands on the car," he ordered. She placed her palms on the roof of her sedan. "Officer, I'm respectfully asking again, what am I being detained for?" Instead of answering, he patted her down roughly, his hands lingering longer than necessary. Desiree stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, counting silently in her head to maintain her composure. "We've had reports of drug trafficking in the area," he finally said. "And you fit a description." Desiree almost laughed at the irony. She'd spent the day bringing down actual drug traffickers. What description is that exactly? Officer Benton ignored her question and picked up her FBI credentials from where he'd placed them on the car roof. He turned them over in his hands, studying them more carefully this time. "These look real enough," he admitted reluctantly, "but that doesn't mean anything. What's an FBI agent doing out here anyway?" "I'm returning from an operation," she said simply. "I'm afraid I can't discuss details." A second police cruiser pulled up, its headlights illuminating the scene. Another officer stepped out, younger, with an uncertain expression as he approached. "Everything okay, Benton?" The young officer, whose nameplate read Officer Chen, looked between them. "Got someone here claiming to be FBI," Officer Benton said. "Run these credentials, will you? And call it in." Officer Chen took Desiree's badge and ID, looking at her with curiosity rather than suspicion. "I'll check these right away, ma'am." As Officer Chen returned to his vehicle, Desiree noticed a passing car slowing down. The driver, an older white woman, was clearly watching the scene unfold. Desiree gave her a small nod. Witnesses were always good in situations like this. "Hands behind your back," Officer Benton suddenly ordered. "Excuse me." Desiree's composure slipped for a moment. "You're going to handcuff a federal agent without cause?" "Standard procedure until we verify your identity," he said, though they both knew it wasn't. Desiree weighed her options. She could refuse, cite the laws he was breaking, demand to speak to his supervisor, but something in his eyes, a challenge, almost hoping she would resist, made her decide against it. Too many people had died on roadsides just like this one because officers felt threatened. She turned slowly, placing her hands behind her back. "I want it noted that I'm complying under protest, and that this detention is unwarranted." The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists as Officer Benton tightened them a notch beyond necessary. "You people always think you're above the law," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Desiree didn't take the bait. "I've dedicated my life to upholding the law, Officer Benton, just like you're supposed to." He led her to his cruiser and roughly guided her into the back seat. The plastic was hard and cold against her back. Through the window, she saw Officer Chen returning from his car, speaking into his radio. His expression had changed, eyebrows raised, eyes widening as he looked toward her. Desiree knew that look. Her credentials had checked out. From the cruiser, she watched as Officer Chen approached Officer Benton and spoke quietly. Benton's body language shifted, shoulders stiffening, head shaking in disbelief or perhaps denial. Her phone began ringing from inside her purse, still in her car. That would be her supervisor. FBI protocol meant he'd been automatically notified when her credentials were run through the system. Desiree closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. This wasn't just about her now. How she handled the next few minutes could impact countless other encounters between law enforcement officers. It could perpetuate a cycle of mistrust and hostility, or it could become something different. Officer Chen approached the cruiser and opened the door. "Agent Williams, I sincerely apologize for the confusion," he said, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Your credentials have been confirmed. I've contacted my sergeant who's on his way." Desiree nodded. "I appreciate that, Officer Chen. Would you mind removing these handcuffs now?" He hesitated, glancing over at Officer Benton, who stood by her car, arms crossed and face like stone. "I'll need Officer Benton's keys," Officer Chen explained awkwardly. "Of course." Desiree kept her voice level, not wanting to make this harder for the young officer who clearly recognized the wrongness of the situation. As she sat there waiting, watching the interplay between the two officers, Desiree began forming a plan. She could file complaints, pursue legal action, make this incident another headline in a long string of similar stories. Or she could try something different. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to turn this roadside humiliation into something constructive, something that might prevent another person from experiencing what she had tonight. The question was, did she have the strength to set aside her justified anger and try? A third set of headlights approached, and Desiree straightened her shoulders as best she could with her hands still cuffed behind her. Whatever she decided, she would face it with the same dignity and resolve that had carried her through 12 years at the Bureau. The next few minutes would change. Several lives forever, including her own. The sergeant's car pulled up to the scene, its headlights adding to the growing spectacle on the highway shoulder. 3 police vehicles with flashing lights had already drawn the attention of several passing cars. Some slowed down to rubberneck, others pulled over entirely, phones held up to record. Desiree remained in the back of Officer Benton's cruiser, hands still cuffed behind her back. Through the window, she watched a stocky man with salt and pepper hair step out of the newest arrival. His uniform carried the stripes of a sergeant, and his face wore the expression of someone who'd just been handed a problem he didn't need. Officer Chen hurried over to the sergeant, speaking rapidly and gesturing toward the cruiser where Desiree sat. The sergeant's eyebrows shot up and he glanced sharply in her direction before turning his attention to Officer Benton. From her uncomfortable seat, Desiree could see but not hear the conversation unfolding. The sergeant's body language spoke volumes, shoulders squared, finger jabbing the air for emphasis, head shaking in what looked like disbelief or disappointment. Officer Benton stood with his arms crossed defensively, chin jutting forward. Her phone had rung 3 more times in her car. By now, her supervisor would be seriously concerned. The Bureau took situations involving their agents very seriously, especially when local law enforcement was involved. The cruiser door opened suddenly and the sergeant stood there, his expression carefully neutral. "Agent Williams, I'm Sergeant Powell. I sincerely apologize for this situation. We're going to get these cuffs off you immediately." He looked over his shoulder. "Benton, keys now." Officer Benton approached slowly, reluctance in every step. He handed the keys to Sergeant Powell rather than doing the job himself. "Turn around, please," Sergeant Powell said to Desiree, his tone respectful. As the cuffs came off, Desiree rubbed her wrists. They were sore and slightly marked from being too tight. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said, her voice professional despite the circumstances. She stepped out of the cruiser, straightening her clothes with as much dignity as she could muster. "I'd like to retrieve my phone from my vehicle. My supervisor has been trying to reach me." "Of course." Sergeant Powell nodded quickly. "Officer Chen, please escort Agent Williams to her vehicle." The young officer jumped to attention. "Yes, sir. This way, ma'am." As they walked the short distance to her car, Officer Chen spoke quietly. "I'm really sorry about all this. This isn't how we're supposed to operate." Desiree gave him a measuring look. There was genuine remorse in his eyes, not just fear of consequences. "I appreciate that, Officer Chen. How long have you been on the force?" "Just 8 months," he admitted. "I'm still on probation." That explained his hesitation to challenge Officer Benton directly. A rookie couldn't afford to make waves. At her car, Desiree retrieved her purse and phone. 6 missed calls from Assistant Director Thompson, her direct supervisor. She sent a quick text. "I'm fine. Situation being resolved. We'll call in 10. When she looked up from her phone, a small crowd had gathered on the shoulder of the road. At least 5 civilians stood at a safe distance watching the scene unfold. Most had phones out recording. One woman, the same older white woman who had slowed down earlier, now stood with her arms crossed watching the officers with open suspicion. "Quite an audience," Desiree remarked to Officer Chen. He shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, everything ends up online these days." "That can be a good thing," Desiree said evenly. "Accountability matters." They walked back to where Sergeant Powell and Officer Benton stood in tense conversation. As they approached, Sergeant Powell broke off mid-sentence. "Agent Williams, I've contacted your field office. Your supervisor confirmed your identity and that you were returning from an operation today. Again, I want to express my deepest apologies for this misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. A carefully chosen word to minimize what had really happened. Desiree let it pass for now. "I appreciate that, Sergeant. I'd like to understand why I was pulled over in the first place. Officer Benton mentioned I was driving suspiciously but didn't elaborate." She turned her gaze directly to Officer Benton, who stared stonily back. The sergeant cleared his throat. "Officer Benton received a call about a vehicle matching your description that might be connected to a drug operation in the county." "That's convenient," Desiree said, keeping her tone neutral despite the absurdity, considering I drive a standard-issue FBI sedan. "May I see the dash cam footage of my suspicious driving?" A flicker of alarm crossed Officer Benton's face. "That's not standard procedure for a traffic stop," he said quickly. "This stopped being a standard traffic stop the moment you handcuffed a federal agent without cause," Desiree replied calmly. "Sergeant Powell, I'm formally requesting all footage related to this incident be preserved. That includes dash cams, body cams, and any other surveillance." Sergeant Powell nodded grimly. "Already done. Agent Williams." He shot a look at Officer Benton that suggested the officer would be explaining himself back at the station. Desiree's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. "Need update. Local PD chief calling me." The situation was escalating up the chain of command on both sides. What had started as one officer's prejudice was now becoming an incident between agencies. "Sergeant, I need to call my supervisor," Desiree said. "May I step aside?" "Of course," he replied. "Take all the time you need." As she walked a few paces away, she heard him addressing the small crowd of onlookers. "Folks, everything is under control. Please return to your vehicles." Few people moved. One man called out, "We're just making sure everything stays proper, officer." Desiree dialed Thompson's number, turning away from the scene for privacy. "Williams, what the hell is happening?" Thompson's gruff voice came through immediately. "I've got the chief of police on my other line trying to smooth things over." "I was racially profiled and detained, sir," Desiree said simply. "Officer claimed suspicious driving, refused to accept my credentials, then handcuffed me until his sergeant arrived to confirm my identity." A long silence then. "Are you all right?" "Yes, sir. No physical harm. Do you need me to come down there? I can be there in 30 minutes with our legal team." Desiree looked back at the scene. Officer Chen talking quietly with some of the onlookers, trying to disperse them. Sergeant Powell on his phone, likely talking to his chief. Officer Benton standing alone by his cruiser, his face a mixture of defiance and dawning realization that he'd made a serious error. "No, sir. I think I can handle this," she said. "But I'd like all footage preserved. And I want to see how the department handles it internally before we decide next steps." "You sure? You don't have to deal with this alone." "I'm sure," Desiree said, a plan forming in her mind. "I think there might be an opportunity here." "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind that might actually change something." "I'll brief you fully tomorrow, but I'd like to try an approach first." Thompson sighed. He knew her well enough to recognize that tone. "All right, Williams. But you call me if anything else happens. And I mean anything." "Understood, sir." "Thank you." Desiree ended the call and took a deep breath. The night air had cooled further, and she rubbed her arms against a sudden chill. When she turned back toward the group, she noticed something she hadn't before. Officer Benton's body camera was off. The small indicator light that should have been blinking wasn't. She approached Sergeant Powell directly. "Sergeant, could you verify that Officer Benton's body camera is operational?" "The indicator light appears to be off." Sergeant Powell's head snapped toward Benton. "Officer!" "Is your camera on?" Benton's hand moved instinctively to his chest. "Battery might have died," he muttered. "Turn it on. Now." The sergeant's voice left no room for argument. Benton pressed the button and the light blinked to life. Too late to capture what had already transpired, but at least the rest would be documented. Desiree made a mental note of this detail. "It would be important later. Sergeant Powell, I'd like to have a word with Officer Benton," she said. Privately, both men looked surprised. Agent Williams, given the circumstances. "I'm not sure that's appropriate," the sergeant began. "I understand your concern, but I'm requesting it officially," Desiree said. "Officer Chen can stand by at a distance if that makes you more comfortable." The sergeant hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Benton, you will listen to what Agent Williams has to say." "Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Benton replied stiffly. As Sergeant Powell stepped away, Desiree gestured for Officer Benton to follow her to a spot a few yards from the others, far enough for privacy, but still in full view. Officer Benton followed reluctantly, his posture rigid with defensiveness. When they stopped, he spoke before she could. "If you're going to threaten me with a lawsuit or federal charges, just get it over with." Desiree studied him for a moment, the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. Behind the bluster was fear, not just fear of consequences, but something deeper. "How long have you been a police officer, Benton?" she asked instead. The question seemed to throw him. 15 years, he answered after a pause. "That's a long time." "You must have seen a lot of changes." His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What's your point?" "My point is that I'm trying to understand why a 15-year veteran would risk his career by profiling and detaining a federal agent without cause." Benton's face hardened. "I was doing my job. There was a call." "We both know there wasn't a call." Desiree cut him off quietly. "Let's not waste time with stories that won't hold up once the records are checked." Silence stretched between them. In the distance, another onlooker had joined the small crowd. "What do you want?" Benton finally asked, his voice lower. Desiree took a step closer, her voice for his ears only. "What I want, Officer Benton, is for no one else to experience what I did tonight. What I want is for you to understand the power you hold when you put on that badge, and what it means to abuse it." For the first time, he looked directly at her, a flicker of something, not quite remorse, but perhaps recognition crossing his face. "The cameras are watching," she continued, gesturing subtly to the onlookers with their phones. "They're always watching now, but that shouldn't be why you do the right thing." She let her words sink in for a moment before adding, "This isn't over, but what happens next depends partly on you." Without waiting for his response, Desiree turned and walked back toward her car, her steps measured and deliberate. Behind her, Officer Benton remained rooted to the spot, watching her go. The night that had started with a routine drive home had become something far more significant. As she reached her vehicle, Desiree knew that the real work was just beginning. The inside of the police station hummed with activity despite the late hour. Desiree sat in a small conference room, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in front of her. The walls were covered with faded community service awards and group photos of officers in formal uniforms. Through the glass door, she could see Sergeant Powell in heated discussion with a man wearing a police chief's uniform. Desiree checked her watch. Nearly midnight. What should have been a quick drive home had turned into a 4-hour ordeal. After her conversation with Officer Benton at the roadside, Sergeant Powell had suggested they continue at the station. Her FBI credentials meant she could have refused, but something told her to follow this through. She pulled out her phone and sent another update to Thompson. "Still at County Station. Meeting with Chief soon. All good." The door opened and Sergeant Powell entered with the police chief, a broad-shouldered man with deep lines around his eyes. "Agent Williams, I'm Chief Rivera. I want to personally apologize for what happened tonight." He extended his hand, which Desiree shook firmly. "I've reviewed the preliminary reports and I assure you this matter will be handled with the utmost seriousness." "I appreciate that, Chief," Desiree replied. "Though I'm curious why Officer Benton isn't part of this conversation." Chief Rivera and Sergeant Powell exchanged glances. "Officer Benton has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation," the chief explained. "Standard protocol for incidents of this nature." Desiree nodded slowly. "And what exactly is your protocol for incidents of this nature, Chief? Because I suspect this isn't the first time something like this has happened in your department." The chief's professional smile faltered. "We take all allegations of misconduct seriously." "This isn't an allegation," Desiree cut in, her voice calm but firm. "This is a documented incident with multiple witnesses and partial video evidence. What I'm asking is how your department typically handles officers who exhibit biased behavior." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Sergeant Powell shifted in his seat. "We have mandatory diversity training twice a year," he offered finally. "And how's that working out?" Desiree asked, raising an eyebrow. Chief Rivera cleared his throat. "Agent Williams, I understand you're upset." "I'm not upset, Chief, I'm concerned." Desiree leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "I'm concerned that your department might be fostering a culture where officers like Benton feel comfortable profiling people based on race. I'm concerned that without the protection of my FBI badge, tonight could have ended very differently. I'm concerned about your community members who don't have that protection." The chief's expression hardened slightly. "Are you planning to file a formal complaint? Or pursue legal action? Because if so, I should contact our department's attorney." "I haven't decided yet," Desiree said truthfully. "But right now I'd like to speak with Officer Chen." Both men looked surprised. "Officer Chen? Why?" Sergeant Powell asked. "I have a few questions for him." And unlike Officer Benton, his body camera was functioning properly the entire time. That comment hung in the air like a warning. After a moment, Chief Rivera nodded. "I'll have him brought in." While they waited, Desiree studied the station bulletin board visible through the glass door. Among the notices and schedules was a flyer for a community outreach program. "Building bridges," it proclaimed in bold letters, showing officers playing basketball with local kids. Something about it caught her attention. The door opened and Officer Chen entered, looking nervous. His uniform was slightly rumpled after the long shift and his eyes darted between the chief and Desiree. "You asked to see me, ma'am?" he said. "Yes, Officer Chen, please sit down." Desiree gestured to the empty chair across from her. "I'd like to ask you a few questions if that's all right." Chen glanced at Chief Rivera, who nodded his permission. "How long have you been partnered with Officer Benton?" Desiree asked once Chen was seated. We're not regular partners, Chen explained. I rotate with different officers as part of my training. Tonight was my third shift with Officer Benton. And in those 3 shifts, have you noticed anything about his approach to traffic stops? Chen hesitated, his discomfort visible. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you do, Desiree said gently. You looked uncomfortable tonight when he ordered me out of my car. You knew something wasn't right. The young officer's eyes dropped to the table. When he looked up again, there was a flash of resolve in his expression. He tends to pull over more people of color, Chen admitted quietly, especially after dark. I noticed it my first shift with him, but I thought maybe it was coincidence. By tonight, he trailed off. Chief Rivera's face darkened, but he remained silent. Have you ever mentioned this to anyone? Desiree asked. Chen shook his head. I'm still on probation. I need this job. Desiree nodded, understanding the difficult position he was in. What made you decide to join the police force, Officer Chen? The question seemed to surprise him. My grandfather was a cop back in Taiwan before he immigrated here. He always talked about how the police should protect everyone equally. I wanted to do the same. That's a worthy goal, Desiree said. Do you feel you're able to live up to that here? Chen looked down at his hands, then back up with unexpected conviction. Not always, but I'm trying. Something shifted in the room, a moment of honesty that cut through the tension. Desiree glanced at the chief and sergeant, who were watching the exchange with guarded expressions. Thank you for your candor, Officer Chen, she said. One last question. What training have you received specifically about identifying and addressing bias in policing? We had a 2-hour seminar during academy, Chen replied after thinking for a moment. And there's an online module we're supposed to complete each year. Does it help? Chen gave a small, helpless shrug. It tells us what not to do. It doesn't really show us how to do better. Desiree nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Officer Chen. I appreciate your honesty. After Chen left, the room fell into silence again. Chief Rivera looked like a man preparing for a storm. Agent Williams, I want to assure you that Officer Benton's actions tonight don't represent our department as a whole, he said carefully. We're committed to fair and unbiased policing. I'm sure that's your intention, Chief, Desiree replied. But intentions aren't enough, are they? Not when the results tell a different story. She stood up, smoothing her jacket. I need to get home. It's been a long day. But I'd like to propose something before I leave. Both men looked at her expectantly. Instead of immediately filing a formal complaint, I'd like 48 hours to consider an alternative approach, one that might actually address the underlying issues rather than just punishing one officer. Chief Rivera looked relieved but cautious. What kind of alternative? I need to make a few calls first, Desiree said. But it would involve your department, my team at the FBI, and possibly that community outreach program I noticed on your bulletin board. Building bridges? Sergeant Powell asked. That's mostly for kids. Maybe it needs to be expanded, Desiree suggested. I'll be in touch tomorrow with a more concrete proposal. As she gathered her things, Chief Rivera stood as well. Agent Williams, I appreciate your measured approach to this situation. Many people in your position would be calling for Officer Benton's badge. Firing one officer doesn't fix a broken system, Chief, Desiree said simply, and I'm more interested in fixing things than breaking them further. Outside in the parking lot, the night air was cool and refreshing after hours in the stuffy conference room. Desiree leaned against her car for a moment, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of the evening. The anger, the humiliation, the fear, emotions she had carefully controlled throughout the ordeal. She took a deep breath, looking up at the stars scattered across the dark sky. Then she noticed a figure standing by a pickup truck several spaces away. Officer Chen apparently just ending his shift. Their eyes met, and after a moment's hesitation, he walked over. Agent Williams, I wanted to apologize again for what happened tonight, he said. I should have spoken up sooner when Officer Benton was... You were in a difficult position, Desiree interrupted gently. Especially as a probationary officer. Chen nodded but didn't look convinced. Still, it wasn't right. I became an officer to help people, not to watch them be mistreated. Something about his earnest expression reminded Desiree of herself as a young FBI recruit, idealistic and determined to make a difference. Officer Chen, can I ask you something? She waited for his nod before continuing. If you had the opportunity to improve how officers in your department approach these situations, would you take it? Even if it meant challenging the status quo? A flicker of interest crossed his face. What kind of opportunity? I'm not entirely sure yet, Desiree admitted. But I'm thinking about a training program. One that goes beyond the typical diversity seminar. Something that addresses the real challenges officers face while also confronting bias head-on. And you'd want me involved? I think your perspective would be valuable, Desiree said. You noticed the problem with Officer Benton's behavior. You were uncomfortable with it. That awareness is the first step toward change. Chen was quiet for a moment, considering. The department might not be open to that kind of thing, especially coming from someone who's only been here 8 months. Let me worry about the department, Desiree said with a small smile. I think Chief Rivera is highly motivated to avoid a federal investigation right now. That drew a surprised laugh from Chen. Yeah, I bet he is. Think about it, Desiree said, handing him her card. And call me if you're interested. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Desiree's mind worked through the possibilities. What had started as a humiliating traffic stop had revealed a deeper problem, but also a potential opportunity. If she could channel her experience into something constructive, something that might prevent similar incidents in the future, then maybe some good could come from tonight's ordeal. Her phone rang, and she answered through the car's speaker system. Williams, she said. It's Thompson. Got your text. Everything really okay? Yes, sir, she replied. Actually, I think it might be better than okay. I have an idea I'd like to discuss tomorrow. An idea? About what happened tonight? About what happens next, Desiree corrected. I think we might have an opportunity here to create something meaningful. Something that could make a real difference in police-community relations. Thompson was quiet for a moment. You never take the easy path, do you, Williams? Desiree smiled slightly as she turned onto her street. No, sir. I don't believe I do. All right, then. First thing tomorrow. My office. And Williams? Yes, sir? I'm glad you're okay. Now go get some rest. As Desiree pulled into her driveway, the clock on her dashboard read 1:17 a.m. The day had been far longer and more complicated than she could have imagined when she woke up that morning. But as she turned off the engine, she felt something unexpected, a sense of purpose. Sometimes the worst moments could lead to the most important changes, and Desiree Williams wasn't one to waste an opportunity for change. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds in Assistant Director Thompson's office. Desiree sat across from him, a folder of hastily assembled documents on her lap. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night developing her idea into something concrete. Thompson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, listening as she finished outlining her proposal. Let me get this straight, he said finally. Instead of filing a formal complaint against Officer Benton and the county police department, which you have every right to do, you want to create a joint training program? Yes, sir, Desiree replied. Not just any training program, though. Something meaningful. Not those check-the-box seminars everyone sleeps through. And you want bureau resources for this? Limited resources, she clarified. Mainly expertise and some personnel time. I've already drafted a preliminary outline. She handed him one of the documents from her folder. I'm proposing a pilot program, 12 weeks involving both our agents and their officers. Thompson skimmed the document, his expression thoughtful. You've put a lot of thought into this overnight. I had plenty of time to think while sitting in the back of that police cruiser, Desiree said with a wry smile. Thompson set the paper down and studied her. You know, most people in your position would be looking for punishment, not partnership. Officer Benton humiliated you, handcuffed you without cause. You could push for his badge. Desiree nodded slowly. I considered that. But then what? One officer gets fired. The department makes a public apology and everything goes back to normal until it happens again. I want something that lasts longer than a news cycle. A hint of pride crossed Thompson's face. That's why you're one of my best agents. He tapped the proposal with his finger. This is good, Williams. Ambitious, but good. You'll need buy-in from the county PD, though. Think they'll go for it? Chief Rivera seemed very eager to avoid a public relations nightmare, Desiree said. Especially one involving the FBI, I think he'll listen. And what about this Officer Benton? Where does he fit in? Desiree had been wrestling with that question all night. That's where it gets complicated. I don't want him fired, but I don't think he should get off without consequences either. So I want him to be part of the program, she said. Not as a participant, but as a case study. I want him to understand exactly what went wrong that night and why it matters. Thompson raised his eyebrows. That's asking a lot from someone who probably doesn't think he did anything wrong. Maybe, Desiree acknowledged. But people can surprise you when you give them the chance. Thompson drummed his fingers on the desk, considering. I assume you'll want to lead this project? I would. With your permission, he nodded slowly. You've earned it. But Williams, he leaned forward, his expression serious. Don't let this become personal. What happened to you was wrong, but this has to be about more than one traffic stop and one officer. It is, Desiree assured him. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. Or worse. All right, Thompson reached for his phone. I'll call Chief Rivera myself. Set up a meeting for this afternoon. Desiree stood, gathering her documents. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Thompson warned. This won't be easy. Change rarely is. The county police department headquarters looked different in daylight. Less intimidating, more ordinary. Desiree and Thompson were shown to the same conference room where she'd sat the night before. This time, Chief Rivera was waiting for them, along with a woman in a crisp suit who introduced herself as the department's legal counsel. After handshakes and introductions, they settled around the table. Assistant Director Thompson, Agent Williams, thank you for coming, Chief Rivera began. I understand you have a proposal you'd like to discuss? We do, Thompson confirmed. Agent Williams has developed an alternative to the formal complaint process that we believe could benefit both our agencies. All eyes turned to Desiree. She opened her folder and distributed copies of her proposal. Chief Rivera, last night you told me your department is committed to fair and unbiased policing, she began. I'd like to take you at your word and offer an opportunity to put that commitment into action. She outlined her plan, a comprehensive training program that would bring FBI agents and local police officers together to address bias in law enforcement. It would include practical scenarios, community involvement, and ongoing evaluation. This wouldn't be just another diversity seminar, she emphasized. It would be hands-on training with real-world applications, and if successful, it could serve as a model for other departments across the country. The legal counsel, Ms. Patel, skimmed the document with a skeptical expression. This seems very extensive. What exactly are you asking from our department? Time primarily, Desiree replied. 12 officers to participate in the pilot program, including Officer Chen, access to your training facilities, and a commitment to implementing the lessons learned. And what about Officer Benton? Chief Rivera asked, cutting to what he clearly saw as the heart of the matter. What happens to him? Desiree met his gaze directly. That depends partly on him. I'm not calling for his termination, but I do want him involved in the program, as a participant and as part of a case study examining what happened that night. Chief Rivera and Ms. Patel exchanged glances. A case study? Ms. Patel echoed. That sounds like public humiliation. Not public, Desiree clarified. Just within the program. And not humiliation, education. We all learn best from real examples, especially difficult ones. And if we decline this proposal? Ms. Patel asked. What then? Thompson spoke up. Then Agent Williams proceeds with a formal complaint against Officer Benton and your department. Given the circumstances, the unnecessary detainment of a federal agent, the body camera that was conveniently turned off, the witnesses, the racial element, I think we all know how that would likely play out. The implied threat hung in the air. Chief Rivera cleared his throat. This proposal, it's unusual, he said slowly, but I appreciate the spirit behind it. Can I ask why this matters so much to you, Agent Williams? Most people in your position would want Officer Benton's badge. Desiree considered her answer carefully. When I was handcuffed in the back of that cruiser last night, I kept thinking about all the people who've been in that same position who didn't have an FBI badge to protect them, who didn't have a supervisor they could call, who didn't have the power to demand accountability. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I became an FBI agent to protect people and uphold justice. This program would do both. It's not about punishing one officer. It's about changing a system that allowed last night to happen in the first place. Chief Rivera studied her, something like respect flickering across his face. I'll need to discuss this with my command staff, and Officer Benton would have to agree to participate. Of course, Desiree nodded. I'd like to speak with him myself if possible. Today? No time like the present. Officer Benton sat across from Desiree in a small interview room, his expression guarded. He was in civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, a reminder of his administrative leave status. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Desiree began. Didn't feel like I had much choice, he replied stiffly. There's always a choice, Officer Benton, Desiree said, just like there was a choice when you decided to pull me over last night. He shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I'm going to be direct, she continued. I've proposed a training program to address bias in policing, and I want you to be part of it. His eyebrows shot up. You want me to take sensitivity training? No, Desiree shook her head. I want you to help develop it. I want you to be part of something that could actually make a difference. Benton stared at her, confusion evident. Why would you want that? Why aren't you trying to get me fired? Would that solve anything? Desiree asked simply. Would firing you change the attitudes that led to what happened last night? He looked down at his hands. You don't know anything about me. I know you've been an officer for 15 years. I know you've probably done a lot of good in that time. And I know that last night you saw my skin color before you saw my badge. Benton's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. I'm offering you a chance to be part of the solution, Desiree continued, to turn what happened last night into something positive. But it won't be easy. You'll have to be honest with me, with your fellow officers, and most importantly with yourself. And if I refuse, then I file a formal complaint. With the dashcam footage, witness statements, and Officer Chen's testimony, it won't go well for you. Benton was silent for a long moment. Why are you doing this? It was the same question Chief Rivera had asked, but coming from Benton, it carried a different weight. Because I believe people can change, Desiree said simply. Even people who make serious mistakes. But that change has to come from within. No amount of mandatory training or punishment will create it. She slid a copy of her proposal across the table. Read this. Think about it. Talk to your family if you need to, but I need your answer by tomorrow. Benton took the document, doubt still clouding his features. You really think this will make a difference? I think it's worth trying, Desiree replied. Don't you? As she stood to leave, Benton looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Agent Williams, he said, for what it's worth. I'm sorry for what happened last night. It wasn't much, just a few words, probably prompted more by fear than genuine remorse. But it was a start. Show me you mean that, Desiree told him. Be part of making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Back in her office that evening, Desiree stared at her computer screen, putting the finishing touches on the formal proposal. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Officer Chen. Just heard about your program idea. Count me in if it happens. Already talked to some other officers who feel the same. A small smile crossed her face. Perhaps change was possible after all. Her desk phone rang, the chief's office calling. Her pulse quickened as she picked up. Agent Williams, Chief Rivera's voice came through. We've considered your proposal, and Officer Benton has agreed to your terms. When can we start? As Desiree hung up the phone, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a path worth taking. What had begun as a night of injustice might just lead to something extraordinary. Sometimes the most powerful response to hatred wasn't more hatred, it was understanding. And sometimes, the best way to fight against a broken system wasn't to tear it down, but to rebuild it from within. 6 months later, Desiree stood at a podium in the county police department's training center, looking out at the assembled faces. The room was filled with a mix of police officers and FBI agents, along with community members and local officials. At the back of the room, a small group of reporters waited, notepads and cameras ready. Today marks the completion of our pilot program, Desiree began, her voice calm and measured. 6 months ago, we set out to create something different, not just another training seminar, but a genuine effort to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they serve. She glanced down at her notes, then set them aside. This moment called for honesty, not prepared remarks. Many of you know that this program began because of a traffic stop gone wrong. I was pulled over, detained and handcuffed despite identifying myself as a federal agent. It was humiliating. It was unjust. And for too many people in our communities, it's a common experience. Several heads nodded in the audience. Near the front, Officer Chen sat with a group of fellow officers who had participated in the program. In the second row, Chief Rivera watched attentively. And at the far end of the third row sat Officer Benton, his expression thoughtful. We could have dealt with that incident in the traditional way, Desiree continued. File complaints. Assign blame. Move on until the next incident. Instead, we chose a harder path, to learn from what happened and create lasting change. She gestured to the people seated in the front row. These officers and agents have spent the past 6 months working together, learning from each other and, most importantly, listening to the communities they serve. They've participated in ride-alongs, community forums, and scenario-based training designed to challenge their assumptions and broaden their perspectives. Desiree stepped away from the podium and moved to the edge of the stage, wanting to connect more directly with her audience. Has it been perfect? No. Have there been uncomfortable moments? Absolutely. Change isn't supposed to be comfortable, but the results speak for themselves. She nodded to Assistant Director Thompson, who pressed a button on his laptop. Behind Desiree, a screen displayed a series of statistics. Community complaints down 30%. Use of force incidents reduced by 25%. Officer satisfaction up 15%. These numbers matter, but they're not the whole story. Desiree gestured toward a woman in the front row. Ms. Winters, would you mind sharing your experience with the program? Ms. Winters, an elderly black woman with silver hair and bright, intelligent eyes, stood slowly. She was a respected community elder who had initially been skeptical of the program. When Agent Williams first asked me to participate, I thought it was just going to be more empty talk, Ms. Winters said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I've seen too many programs come and go without making a real difference. But this was different. She turned slightly to address the officers directly. For the first time in my 73 years, I felt like the police were actually listening to us, not just hearing our words, but understanding our experiences. And more importantly, I saw changes in how officers interact with our neighborhood. There's more respect now, more understanding. As Ms. Winters sat down, a quiet murmur ran through the room. Desiree waited for it to subside before continuing. This program wasn't just about teaching officers to be more sensitive. It was about creating a genuine partnership between law enforcement and the community. It was about recognizing that we all want the same thing: safety, respect, and justice. She paused, her gaze finding Officer Benton. It was also about accountability and growth. Some of you faced hard truths about yourselves during this process. That takes courage. Benton held her gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Today we're announcing that this program will be expanded to all officers in the county. Desiree continued. The FBI will continue to provide resources and support. And we're developing materials to share with other departments across the country. A small burst of applause followed her announcement. Chief Rivera stood and joined Desiree at the podium. I want to thank Agent Williams for her vision and leadership, the chief said. When she first proposed this program, I'll admit I was skeptical. I saw it as a way to avoid negative publicity for our department. I was wrong. The chief's candor surprised Desiree. It wasn't often that law enforcement leaders publicly admitted being wrong about anything. This program has transformed our department, Rivera continued. It's changed how we train, how we patrol, and most importantly, how we think about our role in this community. And it all began because one person chose education over punishment, understanding over anger. As the chief stepped back, Desiree returned to the microphone for her closing remarks. Before we move to the graduation ceremony, there's one more person I'd like to invite to speak. She gestured toward the back of the room. Officer Benton, would you come up here, please? A hush fell over the audience. This wasn't on the program. Even Thompson looked surprised. Officer Benton rose slowly, his expression guarded. As he made his way to the stage, Desiree could feel the tension in the room. For many, he still represented everything that had gone wrong that night 6 months ago. When he reached the podium, Benton looked out at the audience for a long moment before speaking. I didn't want to be here today, he began honestly. 6 months ago, when this all started, I was angry. I thought I was being made an example of. I thought my career was over. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've been a police officer for 15 years. I always thought I was one of the good ones. I told myself I didn't see color, that I treated everyone the same. This program showed me that wasn't true. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Benton continued, his voice growing steadier. That night when I pulled Agent Williams over, I made assumptions based on how she looked. I didn't want to admit that, even to myself. But through this program, I've had to face some hard truths about my own biases. Biases I didn't even know I had. He turned slightly toward Desiree. Agent Williams could have ended my career. She had every right to. Instead, she gave me a chance to learn and grow. Not everyone gets that second chance, and I'm grateful for it. Benton faced the audience again. I can't change what happened that night, but I can change what happens going forward. That's why I've requested to become an instructor in this program, to share what I've learned with other officers. A ripple of surprise went through the room. This was news to everyone, including Desiree. Thank you, Officer Benton, she said as he stepped away from the podium. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Desiree saw something she hadn't expected: genuine transformation. As the ceremony concluded and people began to mingle, Assistant Director Thompson made his way to Desiree's side. Did you know Benton was going to say all that? He asked quietly. No, she admitted. That was all him. Thompson nodded approvingly. You took a big risk with this program, Williams. Not many agents would have had the vision or the forgiveness to turn an incident like that into something positive. It wasn't about forgiveness, Desiree clarified. It was about finding a solution that actually addressed the problem. Before Thompson could respond, Officer Chen approached with a small group of community members. Agent Williams, these folks have some ideas for the next phase of the program, he said. Would you have time to hear them out? Absolutely, Desiree replied with a smile. As she joined their conversation, she noticed Officer Benton across the room, speaking earnestly with Ms. Winters and several other community elders. The sight would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. Later, as the event wound down and the training center began to empty, Desiree found herself alone at the podium, gathering her notes. A movement caught her eye. A young black girl, perhaps 10 years old, standing shyly at the edge of the stage. The child of one of the community participants, Desiree guessed. Hello there, Desiree said warmly. Are you really an FBI agent? The girl asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. I sure am, Desiree replied, showing her the badge she carried. The girl studied it with fascination. My teacher asked us what we want to be when we grow up. I said a police officer, but Joey said I can't because I'm a girl, and Tanya said I can't because I'm black. Desiree knelt down to the girl's level. Well, Joey and Tanya are wrong. You can be anything you want to be, a police officer, an FBI agent, or even the president. Really? The girl's face lit up. Really? Desiree confirmed. And maybe by the time you're old enough, things will be even better. Because of your program? That's part of it, Desiree said. But mostly because of people like you, who don't let others tell them what they can't do. As the girl ran off to rejoin her mother, Desiree gathered the last of her papers. The day had gone better than she could have hoped. What had started as a humiliating traffic stop had evolved into something with the potential to create real change. She thought back to that night 6 months ago, the flash of police lights in her mirror, the cold metal of handcuffs on her wrists, the anger and helplessness she had felt. Those memories wouldn't fade, but they were now accompanied by new ones. Officer Chen's determination to do better, Chief Rivera's public acknowledgement of needed change, Ms. Winters' cautious optimism, and even Officer Benton's journey from defensiveness to genuine growth. Change was slow. It was imperfect, but it was possible. As Desiree walked out of the training center into the bright afternoon sunlight, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her supervisor. Program approved for national rollout. You're changing the game, Williams. She smiled as she tucked the phone back into her pocket. One traffic stop couldn't fix a broken system, but it could be the first step toward building a better one, and sometimes that first step was the most important of all. I didn't want to be here today, he began honestly. 6 months ago, when this all started, I was angry. I thought I was being made an example of. I thought my career was over. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've been a police officer for 15 years. I always thought I was one of the good ones. I told myself I didn't see color, that I treated everyone the same. This program showed me that wasn't true. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Benton continued, his voice growing steadier. That night when I pulled Agent Williams over, I made assumptions based on how she looked. I didn't want to admit that, even to myself. But through this program, I've had to face some hard truths about my own biases I didn't even know I had. He turned slightly toward Desiree. Agent Williams could have ended my career. She had every right to. Instead, she gave me a chance to learn and grow. Not everyone gets that second chance, and I'm grateful for it. Benton faced the audience again. I can't change what happened that night, but I can change what happens going forward. That's why I've requested to become an instructor in this program, to share what I've learned with other officers. A ripple of surprise went through the room. This was news to everyone, including Desiree. "Thank you, Officer Benton," she said as he stepped away from the podium. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Desiree saw something she hadn't expected: genuine transformation. As the ceremony concluded and people began to mingle, Assistant Director Thompson made his way to Desiree's side. "Did you know Benton was going to say all that?" he asked quietly. "No," she admitted. "That was all him." Thompson nodded approvingly. "You took a big risk with this program, Williams. Not many agents would have had the vision or the forgiveness to turn an incident like that into something positive." "It wasn't about forgiveness," Desiree clarified. "It was about finding a solution that actually addressed the problem." Before Thompson could respond, Officer Chen approached with a small group of community members. "Agent Williams, these folks have some ideas for the next phase of the program," he said. "Would you have time to hear them out?" "Absolutely," Desiree replied with a smile. As she joined their conversation, she noticed Officer Benton across the room, speaking earnestly with Ms. Winters and several other community elders. The sight would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. Later, as the event wound down and the training center began to empty, Desiree found herself alone at the podium, gathering her notes. A movement caught her eye. A young black girl, perhaps 10 years old, standing shyly at the edge of the stage. The child of one of the community participants, Desiree guessed. "Hello there," Desiree said warmly. "Are you really an FBI agent?" the girl asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I sure am," Desiree replied, showing her the badge she carried. The girl studied it with fascination. "My teacher asked us what we want to be when we grow up. I said a police officer, but Joey said I can't because I'm a girl. And Tanya said I can't because I'm black." Desiree knelt down to the girl's level. "Well, Joey and Tanya are wrong. You can be anything you want to be, a police officer, an FBI agent, or even the president." "Really?" The girl's face lit up. "Really," Desiree confirmed. "And maybe by the time you're old enough, things will be even better." "Because of your program?" "That's part of it," Desiree said. "But mostly because of people like you who don't let others tell them what they can't do." As the girl ran off to rejoin her mother, Desiree gathered the last of her papers. The day had gone better than she could have hoped. What had started as a humiliating traffic stop had evolved into something with the potential to create real change. She thought back to that night 6 months ago. The flash of police lights in her mirror, the cold metal of handcuffs on her wrists, the anger and helplessness she had felt. Those memories wouldn't fade, but they were now accompanied by new ones. Officer Chen's determination to do better, Chief Rivera's public acknowledgement of needed change, Ms. Winters' cautious optimism, and even Officer Benton's journey from defensiveness to genuine growth. Change was slow. It was imperfect, but it was possible. As Desiree walked out of the training center into the bright afternoon sunlight, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her supervisor. "Program approved for national rollout. You're changing the game, Williams." She smiled as she tucked the phone back into her pocket. One traffic stop couldn't fix a broken system, but it could be the first step toward building a better one. And sometimes that first step was the most important of all.